Tiberius Claudius Nero, who would later be remembered simply as Tiberius, the second emperor of Rome, was born on November 16, 42 BCE, in the midst of one of the most turbulent periods in Roman history. His birth took place in a city still reeling from the aftermath of Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE and the chaos of the ensuing civil wars. Rome, the republic that had dominated the Mediterranean for centuries, was beginning its transformation into an imperial state, though few at the time could have predicted exactly how that transformation would unfold. Tiberius's life and eventual reign would be deeply shaped by the political upheavals of his youth, and his legacy would forever be tied to the shadow of his predecessor and stepfather, Augustus. His childhood was anything but ordinary. Born into the patrician Claudian family, one of the oldest and most distinguished lineages in Rome, Tiberius was the son of Tiberius Claudius Nero and Livia Drusilla. The Claudi were known for their aristocratic pride, military service, and strict moral values. However, nobility in Rome came not only with honor, but also with political entanglements. And from the very beginning, Tiberius's fate was bound up in the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined Roman public life. His father, an experienced politician and supporter of the Republican cause, found himself on the losing side in the struggle between the forces of the Senate and the rising power of Octavian, later known as Augustus. After the defeat of the Republican faction at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, the political situation became increasingly dangerous for those aligned against Octavian. In 40 BCE, when Tiberius was just 2 years old, his family was forced into exile in order to escape Octavian's wrath. They fled to various places, including Sicily, Greece, and even the island of Rhodes, enduring a period of uncertainty and hardship. This early exile left an impression on the young Tiberius, shaping his cautious, often mistrustful nature. The turning point in his family's fortunes came not through military victory, but through political maneuvering. In 39 BCE, his mother Livia divorced his father and married Octavian. This was not merely a matter of personal affection, if indeed there was any, but a calculated political alliance. Livia was renowned for her beauty, intelligence, and political acumen, and her marriage to Octavian brought the Claudian family into the heart of Rome's new ruling elite. For the young Tiberius, this meant a sudden change in circumstances, from exile and uncertainty to a place at the very center of Roman power. Although Octavian never adopted Tiberius at this stage, Livia, sons remained legally the children of her first marriage. Tiberius now grew up in the household of Rome's most powerful man. His upbringing in this environment was disciplined and traditional, reflecting both his mother's strict moral values and the public expectations of the ruling class. Tiberius was educated in rhetoric, literature, and the arts of war, as befitted a Roman aristocrat. He was not, by nature, a charismatic or flamboyant personality. His early tutors described him as serious, reserved, and inclined toward introspection. However, what he lacked in charm, he made up for in diligence and intellect. From an early age, Tiberius demonstrated a gift for careful planning and a keen understanding of political realities, qualities that would later serve him well, though they would also contribute to his reputation as a cold and distant ruler. His first public appearances came in his teenage years, when he was expected to take part in ceremonial events and begin his training for military and political life. At the age of 12, Tiberius delivered the funeral oration for his biological father, a solemn duty that reflected both his family's high status and the Roman tradition of honoring one's ancestors through public speech. By the time he was a young man, Tiberius was already participating in Rome's military campaigns. His first significant command came in 20 BCE, when he accompanied Augustus to the eastern provinces to negotiate with the Parthian Empire. This mission was of great symbolic importance. It aimed to recover the Roman standards lost to the Parthians at the disastrous Battle of Capri in 53 BCE. a defeat that had haunted Roman pride for decades. Although Augustus took the lead in the diplomacy, Tiberius's presence on this mission marked him as a trusted member of the imperial family and introduced him to the complexities of foreign affairs. Tiberius's early military career was marked by competence and discipline. In 15 BCE, alongside his younger brother Drusus, he campaigned in the Alpine regions, securing Rome's frontiers and bringing rebellious tribes under control. The brothers worked well together, combining strategic planning with personal bravery in the field. Tiberius was not a leader who relied on reckless charges or dramatic gestures. Instead, he preferred to plan carefully, maintain strict discipline among his troops, and achieve his objectives through steady, methodical action. His style of command earned him the respect of his soldiers, even if it did not inspire the same kind of popular adoration enjoyed by more flamboyant generals. These campaigns in the Alps were followed by further successes in the Balkans and Germania. By the mid to late 20s BCE, Tiberius had established himself as one of Rome's most capable military commanders. His achievements in securing the empire's borders and pacifying troublesome regions were recognized with a series of honors, including a triumphal procession in Rome. Despite his growing reputation, Tiberius remained in the shadow of Augustus, who was still carefully managing the succession. Augustus had no sons of his own and was considering various possible heirs, including his nephew Marcellus and his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar. For many years, Tiberius seemed to be a secondary figure in this succession plan, valued for his abilities, but not regarded as the likely future emperor. His personal life was also shaped by political considerations. In 20 BCE, Tiberius married Vipsania Agrippina, the daughter of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, Augustus's closest friend and most trusted general. This marriage was a happy one by all accounts, producing a son, Drusus Julius Caesar, and providing Tiberius with a rare source of personal contentment. However, this happiness was not to last. In 12 BCE, Agrippa died, and Augustus, seeking to consolidate his family's position, ordered Tiberius to divorce Vipsania and marry Julia the Elder, Agrippa's widow and Augustus's only biological daughter. This marriage was intended to strengthen Tiberius's ties to the Julian side of the imperial family, but it proved disastrous on a personal level. Julia was known for her extravagance, wit, and scandalous behavior, qualities that clashed sharply with Tiberius's reserved and austere nature. The union was unhappy from the start, and Tiberius never forgave Augustus for forcing him to end his marriage with Vipsania, whom he continued to love deeply. The strain of this personal sacrifice, combined with his dissatisfaction in public life, led Tiberius to take the extraordinary step of withdrawing from Rome altogether. In 06 BCE, at the height of his career, he requested permission to retire from public life and went into self-imposed exile on the island of Rhodes. The reasons for this decision have been debated by historians for centuries. Some suggest that Tiberius was disillusioned with the political intrigues of the court, particularly the maneuvering around the succession. Others point to his unhappy marriage with Julia and his longing for the simpler life he had known with Vipsania. Whatever the precise cause, his withdrawal shocked Rome and created uncertainty about the future leadership of the empire. Tiberius spent nearly 8 years in Rhodes, living quietly and avoiding political entanglements. He devoted himself to study, philosophy, and a simpler way of life, though he remained in contact with his mother and other key figures in Rome. During this time, Augustus's plans for succession suffered a series of setbacks. Both Gaius and Lucius Caesar died young, leaving the emperor without an obvious heir. In this new situation, Tiberius's experience and proven ability made him an increasingly attractive candidate. In 04 CE, Augustus recalled Tiberius to Rome and formally adopted him as his son, making him the designated heir to the imperial throne. At the same time, Augustus required Tiberius to adopt Germanicus, the son of his late brother Drusus, as part of a broader plan to secure the dynasty's future. With this adoption, Tiberius was once again thrust into the center of Roman politics, now as the clear successor to Augustus. Over the next decade, he served as co-ruler with the aging emperor, leading major military campaigns in Germania and along the Danube. His victories in these regions, particularly the successful suppression of revolts and the expansion of Roman influence, reinforced his reputation as a capable and reliable leader. Finally, in 14 CE, Augustus died, and Tiberius, at the age of 55, ascended to the throne as the second emperor of Rome. His rise to power had been anything but straightforward, shaped by exile, personal sacrifice, and years of service in the shadow of a legendary predecessor. The early experiences of Tiberius, his aristocratic upbringing, his disciplined military career, his retreat to Rhodes, and his eventual recall formed the foundation of the ruler he would become. Reserved, cautious, and often mistrustful, he approached the imperial office with a sense of duty rather than ambition, fully aware of the challenges that lay ahead and the impossibility of escaping comparison with Augustus. Tiberius's reign entered a more complex and darker phase as the years went on, marked by an increasingly strained relationship with the Senate, deep suspicion toward political opponents, and a gradual withdrawal from public life that would define the later years of his rule. In the early years after the death of Augustus, Tiberius had at least maintained the facade of working in harmony with the Senate and respecting republican traditions. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in this political arrangement. One of the core issues was Tiberius' own personality. He was not a man who relished public ceremony or the theatrical display of power, which Romans had come to expect from their leaders. He was private, cautious, and often evasive, a ruler who preferred to delegate responsibilities rather than be the visible center of attention. While this modesty might seem admirable in some contexts, in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, it was often interpreted as aloofness or even disdain for the governing institutions of Rome. Tiberius' reluctance to take initiative in public matters gave more room for ambitious individuals in his inner circle to gain influence, a development that would prove both beneficial and dangerous in the years ahead. Among these individuals, the most prominent was Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard. Originally appointed by Augustus, the Praetorian Guard had been intended as a personal security force for the emperor, stationed close to Rome to protect the ruler and the capital. Under Tiberius, however, Sejanus expanded the political role of the Guard and consolidated its power in ways that were unprecedented. Tiberius trusted Sejanus deeply in the beginning, perhaps too deeply, and gave him considerable authority over the day-to-day management of the empire. Sejanus capitalized on this trust to strengthen his control over the military elite in Rome, moving the Guard from scattered encampments into a single fortified camp just outside the city walls. This move not only centralized their power, but also brought them closer to the political heart of the empire, giving Sejanus a direct role in Roman politics that was far more significant than that of any previous Praetorian commander. Sejanus became adept at managing the delicate balance between flattery and manipulation in his dealings with Tiberius. Publicly, he was the loyal servant, praising Tiberius's wisdom and judgment. Privately, he maneuvered to eliminate rivals and expand his influence, cultivating alliances among senators, equestrians, and other members of the imperial court. Over time, his role grew so prominent that some senators began to see Sejanus as the true power behind the throne, especially as Tiberius began to spend more time away from the capital. Sejanus's political rise was accompanied by a noticeable increase in treason trials legal, proceedings against individuals accused of plotting against the emperor or speaking ill of his rule. While Augustus had occasionally used such trials to deal with dangerous opponents, under Tiberius they became a more regular feature of political life, and many contemporaries suspected that Sejanus encouraged them to remove his personal enemies. The treason trials, known as maestas cases, were often based on vague charges, and the atmosphere of fear they created began to poison political life in Rome. Senators became cautious about speaking openly in the Senate, worried that a careless remark could be interpreted as disloyalty. Accusations could come from rivals or even supposed friends, and the accused often faced exile, confiscation of property, or execution. This climate of suspicion reflected Tiberius's increasingly distrustful outlook, but it was also shaped by Sejanus's manipulations. Tiberius, who was naturally suspicious and inclined to see plots in the shadows, found in Sejanus a man who confirmed his fears and promised to protect him from hidden enemies. The more Tiberius relied on Sejanus for security and political advice, the more power the Praetorian commander wielded, and the more isolated the emperor became from other advisors. The turning point in Tiberius's reign came in AD 26, when he made the surprising decision to leave Rome and take up residence on the island of Capri, off the coast of Campania. Officially, Tiberius claimed he was seeking a quieter, healthier environment away from the political intrigues of the capital, but his retreat fueled speculation about his true motives. Some believed he had grown weary of politics and wanted to live in semi-retirement, leaving the governance of the empire to his trusted subordinates. Others suspected that Tiberius's withdrawal was driven by paranoia, that he felt unsafe in Rome and preferred the physical security of a remote island fortress. Capri offered both seclusion and control. It was small, easily defensible, and allowed Tiberius to receive visitors only when he wished. From there, he continued to correspond with the Senate and provincial governors. But the physical distance made him more dependent than ever on the reports of Sejanus and other intermediaries. Capri soon became the subject of lurid rumors in Rome. Ancient sources such as Suetonius and Tacitus portray it as a place of excess and depravity, claiming that Tiberius indulged in bizarre and immoral pleasures away from the public eye. While some of these stories are likely exaggerated or invented by political enemies, they reflect the widespread perception that the emperor had abandoned the moral discipline and public service expected of a Roman leader. The image of Tiberius as a reclusive, possibly corrupt ruler contrasted sharply with the idealized image of Augustus, and it contributed to the erosion of his popularity. Nonetheless, Tiberius continued to exercise authority from Capri, issuing orders and decrees through written correspondence and occasional visits to the mainland. In Rome, meanwhile, Sejanus's power reached its peak. With the emperor absent, Sejanus became the gatekeeper to imperial decisions, controlling access to Tiberius and shaping the flow of information. In AD 31, he was elevated to the rank of consul, a position that placed him symbolically on equal footing with the emperor himself. There were even rumors that Sejanus intended to marry into the imperial family, possibly through a union with Tiberius's widowed daughter-in-law, Livilla. Such a marriage would have solidified Sejanus's claim to the succession and potentially allowed him to become emperor after Tiberius's death. Whether Tiberius was genuinely unaware of Sejanus's ambitions or merely slow to act against him is unclear, but by the autumn of AD 31, the emperor had finally turned against his once trusted aide. The fall of Sejanus was sudden and dramatic. From Capri, Tiberius orchestrated a carefully planned move to strip Sejanus of power without alerting him to the danger. In October of AD 31, Tiberius sent a letter to the Senate that appeared at first to praise Sejanus, but gradually shifted into a detailed accusation of his treachery. By the time the letter was read in full, it was clear that the emperor was ordering Sejanus's arrest. The Praetorian Guard, still loyal to Tiberius, carried out the order, and Sejanus was executed the same day. His statues were torn down, his family and allies were hunted, and his name was publicly condemned. The purge that followed was ruthless, with many of Sejanus's supporters put to death or exiled, their properties confiscated by the state. The execution of Sejanus did not restore harmony to Tiberius's reign. If anything, it deepened the atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Tiberius, now in his 70s, became even more reclusive, spending the last years of his life on Capri and rarely appearing in public. He continued to rule effectively in administrative matters, maintaining the stability of the provinces and the discipline of the legions. But in Rome, the political climate remained tense. The Senate, cowed by years of treason trials and purges, offered little resistance to imperial authority, but it also lacked genuine enthusiasm for the emperor's policies. Many senators simply sought to survive by flattering Tiberius and avoiding any hint of opposition. Despite his growing unpopularity among Rome's elite, Tiberius left behind a legacy of cautious but competent governance. He maintained the empire's borders, refrained from costly wars of expansion, and ensured the treasury remained healthy. His fiscal discipline was notable. Unlike some later emperors, Tiberius avoided lavish spending on games or building projects, preferring to keep Rome's finances strong. He also paid close attention to the administration of the provinces, ensuring that governors were held accountable for corruption and mismanagement. However, his suspicion and detachment from public life undermined his achievements in the eyes of many contemporaries, who saw him as a ruler more concerned with self-preservation than with inspiring the people of Rome. By the time of his death in AD 37, Tiberius had ruled for more than 2 decades, steering the empire through a period of relative peace, but also casting a long shadow over the political culture of the early Principate. His reign illustrated the dangers of excessive reliance on a single advisor, the corrosive effects of political paranoia, and the challenges faced by any ruler trying to govern an empire while remaining physically and emotionally distant from its people. Tiberius's complex character, a mixture of military discipline, political caution, and deep mistrust, ensured that his reign would be remembered as both stable and oppressive, a paradox that would intrigue historians for centuries to come. When Tiberius entered the later period of his reign, the Rome that had once been filled with optimism during the early Principate began to change in tone, both politically and socially. The transformation was not sudden, but rather gradual, shaped by a combination of political paranoia, growing distrust between the emperor and the Senate, the rise of the Praetorian Guard as a political force, and the increasing influence of ambitious and dangerous figures at court, most notably Lucius Aulus Sejanus. This stage of Tiberius's life is one of the most debated in Roman history, as historians have long wrestled with the question of whether he was a naturally suspicious and cruel ruler from the start, or whether the pressures of governance, the betrayals of trusted allies, and the unique political landscape of Rome pushed him toward tyranny. One of the most pivotal developments in this middle phase of Tiberius's rule was his deepening reliance on Sejanus. The Praetorian Guard, which Augustus had established as the emperor's elite bodyguard, was originally spread throughout Rome and Italy in various barracks. Sejanus, a shrewd and ambitious man, convinced Tiberius to consolidate the guard into a single fortified Camp Vicastra Praetoria on the outskirts of Rome. This seemingly practical move had immense consequences. For the first time in Roman history, a single military force stationed within striking distance of the city could be mobilized directly for political purposes. It gave Sejanus enormous influence, not just over the emperor's personal safety, but over the political climate of the capital itself. Sejanus's rise was not just due to his control over the Praetorian Guard. He also understood how to manipulate Tiberius's personality. Tiberius was famously reserved, distrustful of flattery, and uncomfortable with the pomp and ceremony of public life. But Sejanus played the role of a loyal and capable deputy perfectly, presenting himself as a man who shared Tiberius's disdain for corruption and his desire for order in the empire. In reality, Sejanus harbored ambitions that went far beyond loyalty, and his strategy involved isolating Tiberius from the Senate and removing political rivals one by one. The removal of rivals began with subtlety. Charges of treason majestas were a powerful weapon in imperial politics. While Augustus had used such accusations sparingly, under Tiberius, the number of treason trials began to rise. At first, Tiberius may have believed these trials were a necessary tool to maintain stability, but they quickly became a means for ambitious men like Sejanus to eliminate enemies and consolidate their own influence. Senators began to fear that any expression of dissent, even mild criticism, could be twisted into evidence of disloyalty to the emperor. This fear altered the atmosphere in the Senate, transforming it from a body that had once been a partner in governance to one that was increasingly subservient and cowed. Despite these political tensions, Tiberius's administration in this period was still remarkably competent in several areas. His economic policies remained careful and pragmatic, ensuring that the empire's finances were stable. The provinces, particularly those that had been restless under Augustus, were generally well managed. Tiberius appointed capable governors and kept a close eye on their conduct, demanding reports and occasionally intervening to correct abuses. His foreign policy also remained cautious, preferring diplomacy to conquest. For example, he handled the delicate situation in Armenia, a buffer state between Rome and Parthia, through negotiation rather than war, ensuring Roman influence without draining the treasury on costly campaigns. However, Tiberius's personal withdrawal from public life was becoming more pronounced. He had never enjoyed the constant public appearances that Augustus had mastered so skillfully, and as the years went by, his reluctance to appear in the forum, attend Senate sessions, or participate in public ceremonies became increasingly noticeable. This absence allowed rumors to flourish. In the politically charged atmosphere of Rome, an absent ruler was often assumed to be plotting or hiding something. This perception deepened the Senate's insecurity and gave Sejanus even greater control over day-to-day political life in the capital. Sejanus's influence reached its height when Tiberius suffered a series of personal tragedies that further eroded his trust in those around him. The death of his son Drusus Julius Caesar in AD 23 was a devastating blow. Ancient sources, particularly Tacitus, hint at foul play, suggesting that Sejanus may have been involved in poisoning Drusus to remove him as a rival. Whether or not this was true, the loss left Tiberius without a clear heir and more dependent than ever on Sejanus. The Praetorian prefect's position became almost unassailable, and senators began to court his favor as though he were co-ruler. During this time, Tiberius began to express open contempt for the Senate, criticizing them for their sycophancy and lack of independence. Yet his own policies encouraged this servility. The treason trials intensified, and fear became a tool of governance. Public executions of those convicted of maestas charges sent a chilling message. Loyalty to the emperor was not just expected, it was demanded without question. This climate of fear also led to an increase in informers, or delatores, who could earn rewards and imperial favor by accusing others of treason. Some historians argue that Tiberius himself encouraged this, while others believe it was largely the work of Sejanus exploiting the emperor's trust. In foreign affairs, the empire continued to experience relative peace, though there were occasional disturbances in the provinces. In North Africa, Roman forces dealt with uprisings by local tribes, while in the eastern provinces, delicate diplomacy kept Parthian ambitions in check. Tiberius's preference for maintaining stability rather than expanding the empire's borders contrasted sharply with the more aggressive policies of earlier Roman leaders, but it suited his personality and the needs of the time. Culturally, the Rome of Tiberius's middle reign was still a vibrant center of literature, art, and architecture, though the atmosphere of political repression had an impact on intellectual life. Writers and historians were careful about what they published, often resorting to indirect criticism or allegory to express dissent. This caution meant that the era produced fewer openly political works than the time of Augustus, but it also fostered a certain refinement in literary style, as authors learned to navigate the dangers of imperial censorship. The turning point that would bring this period of consolidation to an end came with the growing suspicion of Sejanus. Tiberius, who had relied on the Praetorian prefect for nearly 2 decades, began to hear whispers that Sejanus's ambitions might include seizing the throne itself. Ancient sources suggest that Antonia Minor, the widow of Tiberius's brother Drusus the Elder, played a key role in warning the emperor about Sejanus's plots. Whether motivated by loyalty or by her own political calculations, Antonia's message planted a seed of doubt in Tiberius's mind. By this time, Tiberius had already begun spending more time away from Rome, preferring the relative seclusion of his villas on the island of Capri. This retreat from the capital was both a physical and symbolic withdrawal from the political life of the city. From Capri, Tiberius continued to govern through correspondence, issuing orders and decrees. But this distance made him even more reliant on those who controlled the machinery of government in Rome, chief among them Sejanus. It was from this remote position that Tiberius began to plot the downfall of the man who had once been his most trusted advisor. The growing rift between emperor and prefect was not immediately visible to the public, as Tiberius played his cards carefully. He allowed Sejanus to believe he still had imperial favor, even as he worked quietly to turn key allies against him. This methodical approach reflected Tiberius's cautious and calculating nature, but it also revealed the darker side of his character, his willingness to employ secrecy, deception, and psychological manipulation in the service of political survival. As the stage was set for Sejanus's dramatic fall, the atmosphere in Rome became more tense than ever. Senators who had aligned themselves with the prefect began to sense that their positions might be in danger. The very tools Sejanus had used to eliminate rivals the treason trial could now be turned against him and his allies. The intricate political game that Tiberius and Sejanus had played together for years was about to transform into a deadly confrontation. In this phase of Tiberius's reign, we see a ruler whose early competence and restraint had given way to isolation, distrust, and reliance on dangerous allies. The empire remained stable on the surface, its finances secure, its borders defended, and its provinces orderly, but beneath that surface, the political culture of Rome was growing increasingly toxic. The Senate had been reduced to a body of fearful yes-men. The Praetorian Guard was more powerful than ever, and the shadow of suspicion hung over every interaction between the emperor and his subjects. The eventual downfall of Sejanus would not just mark the end of an era in Tiberius' rule, it would unleash a new wave of political purges and deepen the emperor's retreat into seclusion. The next chapter of his reign would be defined by vengeance, paranoia, and the slow unraveling of the delicate balance Augustus had worked so hard to create. As we move into this later stage of Tiberius's story, the question of whether he had always been destined to rule as a recluse and a tyrant, or whether circumstances shaped him into one, will loom larger than ever in our exploration of the Roman Empire as second ruler. Tiberius's later reign was marked by a complex mixture of calculated governance, deeply personal distrust, and a growing reliance on those around him to carry out the practical work of running the empire. By this stage in his life, the emperor had already endured decades of military campaigns, political maneuvering, and personal loss. Age, weariness, and the scars of betrayal had left him cautious to the point of paranoia. The death of his son Drusus in 23 CE had been a heavy blow, and the ambitious and increasingly powerful Praetorian prefect, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, had stepped into the vacuum of influence at the heart of the imperial court. For a time, Tiberius trusted Sejanus almost as a partner in governance, allowing him to act with a degree of independence unusual for anyone not directly part of the Julio-Claudian bloodline. Sejanus became the filter through which petitions reached the emperor, and senators, generals, and provincial governors quickly realized that gaining Sejanus' favor could be just as important, if not more, than appealing directly to Tiberius. In many ways, This was the beginning of the emperor's gradual retreat from the day-to-day affairs of Rome, as his confidence in the people closest to him, especially Sejanus, led him to withdraw further from public life. In the years immediately following Drusus's death, Tiberius began delegating more responsibilities to his trusted prefect. This arrangement initially seemed to benefit the empire. Sejanus was efficient, decisive, and deeply loyal, at least on the surface. He carried out administrative reforms, oversaw the smooth functioning of the Praetorian Guard, and handled sensitive political issues with apparent skill. Yet beneath this facade of loyalty, Sejanus was carefully and patiently consolidating his own power. He sought to remove rivals, both real and imagined, from positions of influence, using subtle manipulations and accusations of treason to eliminate those who might oppose his ambitions. The Senate, increasingly under the shadow of the emperor's displeasure, became a timid body, often quick to condemn those accused of disloyalty, hoping to demonstrate their own loyalty in the process. This environment created fertile ground for intrigue and fear, as senators watched their colleagues fall from grace, unsure of who might be targeted next. Tiberius's retreat from Rome became physical as well as political in 26 CE, when he left the capital and moved to the island of Capri. The reasons for this move have been debated by historians for centuries. Some believe that Tiberius sought a quieter, more peaceful life away from the constant demands of the imperial court. Others suggest that he was motivated by personal grief, combined with an increasing distaste for the politics of Rome. Ancient sources, particularly hostile ones like Suetonius and Tacitus, painted lurid pictures of Tiberius's time on Capri, accusing him of indulging in all manner of depravity and vice. Whether these accounts are accurate or exaggerated propaganda from his enemies is difficult to determine. But what is certain is that Capri allowed Tiberius to govern from a distance, communicating with Rome primarily through letters and trusted messengers. This isolation would only increase the influence of Sejanus, who remained in the capital and acted as the de facto ruler of the empire. From his position of near absolute control in Rome, Sejanus moved to tighten his grip on power. He cultivated an image of loyalty to Tiberius, while simultaneously positioning himself as the next logical successor to the throne. To achieve this, he systematically removed members of the imperial family who could challenge his ambitions. The most significant obstacle was Agrippina the Elder, the widow of Germanicus, and her sons, who were seen by many as the rightful heirs of Augustus's bloodline. Sejanus orchestrated a campaign of slander against them, painting them as dangerous conspirators plotting against Tiberius. Over time, he convinced the emperor of their disloyalty, leading to their arrest and eventual deaths, either in prison or through forced starvation. These purges, carried out under the shadow of imperial authority, further terrified the political elite of Rome. Few dared to speak out, fearing that they too might be accused of treason. While Sejanus's power grew unchecked in the capital, Tiberius continued to manage broader imperial policies from Capri. He maintained strict oversight of the provinces, ensuring that governors adhered to his high expectations for fiscal discipline and legal order. The emperor's letters to the Senate reveal a man still deeply concerned with the stability of the empire, even if he was unwilling to physically return to Rome. His military policies remained consistent: avoid unnecessary wars, maintain strong defenses along the empire's borders, and ensure that legions were well-trained and disciplined. These measures kept the empire secure during his absence, a testament to the administrative systems he had helped build earlier in his reign. However, the cracks in Tiberius's trust began to show. Reports of Sejanus's overreach eventually reached the emperor, and over time, Tiberius grew suspicious of his once trusted prefect. The turning point came when Tiberius received credible intelligence that Sejanus might be plotting to seize the throne outright. The details of this intelligence remain murky, but the consequences were dramatic. In 31 CE, Tiberius orchestrated Sejanus's downfall in a masterstroke of political deception. From Capri, he sent a letter to the Senate, seemingly praising Sejanus at first, but gradually shifting to a tone of accusation, revealing the prefect's treachery. The Senate, stunned but eager to prove its loyalty to the emperor, moved quickly. Sejanus was arrested during a Senate session and executed that very day. His body was dragged through the streets of Rome, and his statues and honors were destroyed. In the aftermath, a purge swept through Rome as allies, friends, and family members of Sejanus were hunted down and executed, their property confiscated for the state. While Tiberius had removed a dangerous rival, the purge only deepened the climate of fear in the capital. The removal of Sejanus marked a significant shift in the final years of Tiberius's reign. Without his powerful prefect, Tiberius relied on a smaller circle of advisors, but his distrust of nearly everyone in Rome made governance increasingly difficult. The emperor's communications with the Senate became sharper in tone, often scolding them for incompetence, cowardice, or corruption. His once reasonable approach to justice hardened into something more ruthless. Accusations of treason were pursued with relentless vigor, and trials became spectacles in which the outcome was rarely in doubt. Some historians have argued that Tiberius's later rule descended into tyranny, though others maintain that he remained a capable administrator who simply refused to tolerate dissent. On Capri, Tiberius's personal life was the subject of endless rumor. Ancient writers claimed he surrounded himself with astrologers, magicians, and a small group of confidants who indulged his every whim. Stories of scandal and debauchery were circulated widely, though it is unclear how much truth these accounts contained. What is known is that the emperor became increasingly isolated, limiting personal contact to a few trusted attendants. His health began to decline, though he remained sharp of mind, continuing to issue detailed instructions for the governance of the empire. Despite the atmosphere of fear in Rome, Tiberius ensured that the provinces remained well managed. Taxation was kept in check, public works continued in many cities, and military discipline remained high. Trade routes across the Mediterranean and beyond stayed secure, allowing the empire's economy to function smoothly. In some respects, these accomplishments were overshadowed by the negative image propagated by his enemies, who painted him as a cruel recluse. Nevertheless, the stability of the empire during his absence speaks to the effectiveness of the systems he had built. As the years passed, succession became an increasingly urgent issue. With Drusus dead and Germanicus's sons either deceased or imprisoned, the logical heir was Gaius Julius Caesar, better known to history as Caligula, the surviving son of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder. Tiberius, despite his mistrust of almost everyone, eventually recognized Caligula as a potential successor, though his decision may have been made reluctantly. Caligula was summoned to Capri in the early 30s CE, where he lived under the watchful eye of the emperor. While some sources suggest that Tiberius took a liking to his great-nephew, others claim he saw Caligula as a necessary but dangerous choice, someone who could keep the Julio-Claudian line alive, but whose temperament might be unpredictable. By 36 CE, Tiberius was in his late 70s, an extraordinary age for a Roman emperor. His health had deteriorated significantly, and he rarely left his villa on Capri. Yet even in these final years, he continued to correspond with the Senate, issue decrees, and oversee the functioning of the empire. His mind remained sharp, and his attention to detail in administrative matters never wavered. The empire, for all its internal fears and rivalries, was stable and secure, a testament to his cautious, disciplined approach to governance. The end came in March of 37 CE. Tiberius was traveling from Capri to the mainland, perhaps in an attempt to return to Rome, or to oversee affairs in person one final time. He stayed at the villa of Lucullus at Misenum, where he fell gravely ill. According to some accounts, he appeared to recover briefly, leading to speculation and rumors among those eager for his death. The most famous version of the story, though likely embellished, claims that Caligula and the Praetorian prefect Macro feared Tiberius might live longer and revoke his succession plans. In this telling, they ensured his death, possibly by smothering him with a pillow. Whatever the exact circumstances, Tiberius died on March 16, 37 CE, at the age of 77. His body was returned to Rome and cremated, and his ashes were placed in the mausoleum of Augustus alongside his predecessors. In death, Tiberius left behind a complex legacy. To some, he was a master of restraint, a ruler who preserved the empire's stability and avoided costly wars. To others, he was a suspicious, ruthless tyrant whose final years were marked by fear, purges, and withdrawal from public life. Ancient historians, many of whom disliked him, tended to emphasize his faults, portraying him as a man corrupted by power and isolation. Yet modern historians have often reassessed his reign more favorably, noting that under Tiberius, the Roman Empire remained secure, prosperous, and administratively sound. His careful stewardship ensured that the empire Augustus had built would endure for decades to come, even if his personal reputation suffered in the process. In many ways, Tiberius was a ruler ahead of his time, deeply aware of the fragility of power, wary of overextension, and determined to keep the empire stable at all costs. Whether history judges him kindly or harshly, there is no denying that his reign shaped the early foundations of imperial Rome, setting precedents that would influence emperors for generations. By the time Tiberius entered the final years of his reign, the atmosphere in Rome had shifted from cautious respect to a combination of dread, weariness, and quiet resentment. The long shadow of the emperor's personality loomed over the city and provinces alike, and his governance, once marked by stability and careful administration, had devolved into an oppressive regime dominated by fear, paranoia, and political purges. Part of this transformation had roots in his own personal disillusionment. Part of it lay in the toxic political culture that had developed under his hand, where informers thrived and senators whispered behind closed doors, unsure of who might be listening. The man who had once reluctantly taken power now seemed almost entirely detached from the human side of governance, preferring isolation, secrecy, and indirect control over the machinery of the state. Capri, his chosen highland refuge, became the center of imperial authority, while Rome, deprived of its ruler's direct presence, felt increasingly disconnected from its emperor. Tiberius' absence from the capital was not just symbolic, it had real political consequences. In Rome, power gradually coalesced around the Praetorian prefect Lucius Aelius Sejanus, whose ambitions had already been dramatically exposed and destroyed in earlier years. Following Sejanus' execution, Tiberius grew more reclusive and distrustful than ever, unwilling to allow any single individual to amass comparable influence. But this created a vacuum of trust and loyalty at the highest levels of government. The Senate, meanwhile, was reduced to a fearful and submissive body, its members more concerned with self-preservation than with offering genuine counsel or debate. The emperor's relationship with the Senate, never warm, deteriorated further as the years passed. Tiberius often sent orders from Capri via letters, leaving the Senate to enact his will without his physical presence. This remote form of governance further cemented the perception that Rome's ruler was more a distant overlord than an engaged statesman. One of the defining features of this late period was the prevalence of maiestas, treason trials. Initially intended as a legal safeguard against plots to overthrow the state, the maiestas law had become a tool of political manipulation and vengeance. Accusations could be leveled on the flimsiest pretexts, careless words, satirical verses, or perceived slights against the emperor's dignity. Informers, delatores, prospered in this climate as their services were rewarded with wealth, political advancement, or confiscated property from the accused. The result was a suffocating atmosphere in which suspicion permeated every level of society. Friends and family members were wary of speaking openly, knowing that an overheard jest or a politically charged remark could lead to imprisonment or worse. While some historians have argued that Tiberius personally disliked the extremity of these prosecutions, it is undeniable that he allowed them to flourish, and his occasional interventions to mitigate punishments were rare and selective. The emperor's physical absence from Rome also fostered an enduring sense of mystery around his daily life and mental state. Reports about his behavior on Capri varied wildly, ranging from accounts of a quiet, scholarly ruler who devoted himself to reading and philosophical discussion, to scandalous rumors of debauchery, cruelty, and grotesque entertainments. Ancient historians such as Suetonius and Tacitus, both of whom were writing decades later, painted lurid portraits of Tiberius' private life during this period. Whether these tales were exaggerated propaganda or grounded in some truth remains a matter of scholarly debate. What is clear is that the perception of Tiberius among the Roman people and elites grew steadily darker. For many, he had become the embodiment of tyranny, not in the overtly flamboyant manner of later emperors like Caligula or Nero, but in the cold, calculating, and shadowy style that slowly strangled public life. Despite his increasing detachment from Rome, Tiberius did not entirely neglect the affairs of the empire. He maintained a steady hand on foreign policy, favoring stability and cautious diplomacy over military adventurism. The frontiers remained secure, thanks in part to competent generals and provincial governors who executed his policies effectively. Tiberius' fiscal prudence also ensured that the imperial treasury was well managed. His careful budgeting and avoidance of reckless spending meant that Rome's finances remained robust. This economic stability, coupled with the lack of major external wars, contributed to a general peace across much of the empire, a peace that contemporaries sometimes referred to as the Pax Romana. Yet this same stability was undermined by the internal atmosphere of fear and distrust. While roads, aqueducts, and administrative systems functioned smoothly, the human spirit of the Roman elite was stifled under the oppressive political climate. One of the few areas where Tiberius seemed to maintain consistent engagement was the succession question. His chosen heir, Germanicus' son Gaius, known to history as Caligula, had grown to adulthood under a combination of imperial favor and careful watch. Caligula's youth and popularity among the troops and the people made him an attractive choice for succession, at least in the eyes of those weary of Tiberius' somber and reclusive rule. Yet Tiberius, ever suspicious, never fully trusted anyone, including his designated heirs. The presence of another potential successor, his own grandson Tiberius Gemellus, further complicated matters. Ancient sources suggest that in his final years, the emperor wavered between the two, perhaps even intending to create a joint succession to balance their power. This indecision would later have dramatic consequences after his death. By 35 CE, the aging emperor's health began to decline. His retreat to Capri became even more permanent, and he rarely, if ever, left the island. Reports of his illness reached Rome, and speculation about his impending death spread quickly among the political class. The prospect of change, any change, was met with a mixture of hope and anxiety. For some, Tiberius' departure promised relief from the suffocating political environment. For others, it meant the uncertainty of a new and potentially unstable ruler. The final months of his life were marked by an almost Shakespearean level of intrigue. Courtiers and political figures maneuvered for position, alliances were quietly forged, and every rumor about the emperor's health was weighed for its political implications. Tiberius died on March 16, 37 CE, at the age of 77. The circumstances of his death remain controversial. Some ancient accounts claim that he succumbed to natural causes, his body finally giving way after years of aging and illness. Others, however, allege that he was deliberately smothered or otherwise hastened to death by his would-be successors, possibly at the instigation of Caligula and the Praetorian prefect Nevius, Sutorius Macro. The most sensational version holds that after Tiberius appeared to have died, celebrations began in anticipation of Caligula's accession, only for the emperor to stir back to life, forcing his enemies to ensure the job was finished. Whether these stories are true or embellished, they reflect the deep mistrust and fear that characterized the final chapter of his reign. The reaction to Tiberius' death was telling. While the Senate and people of Rome observed the formal rituals of mourning, there was little genuine grief among the elite. In fact, many welcomed the end of his rule with undisguised relief. The Senate even debated whether to grant him the traditional honors of deification, with some members openly opposing the idea. Ultimately, political expediency prevailed, and he was accorded the standard posthumous honors, though without the enthusiasm that had greeted the death of Augustus. His ashes were placed in the mausoleum of Augustus, physically linking him to the dynasty's founder, even if his legacy remained far less beloved. In assessing Tiberius' reign, historians have often struggled with the dual nature of his rule. On one hand, he was an able administrator, a competent military leader in his earlier years, and a ruler who maintained the empire's stability and prosperity. On the other hand, his later years were marred by political purges, paranoia, and a withdrawal from direct governance that left Rome in the hands of sycophants, informers, and opportunists. His reign serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and distrust in leadership. The transformation from a reluctant, disciplined ruler to a detached, feared autocrat underscores the corrosive effects of prolonged power and personal disillusionment. In the broader sweep of Roman history, Tiberius remains a complex and often misunderstood figure. He lacked the charisma of Julius Caesar, the political genius of Augustus, or the flamboyant notoriety of later emperors like Caligula and Nero. Instead, he governed in a manner that was methodical, austere, and in the end, profoundly alienating. His story is one of contrasts, between public success and private failure, between stability and oppression, between the ideals of the Principate and the realities of absolute power. In his final years, the empire he ruled remained intact and prosperous, but the seeds of future instability had been sown seeds that would soon bear fruit in the tumultuous reign of his successor. Tiberius' death closed a significant chapter in the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and with Caligula's rise to power, Rome would experience a very different style of leadership. Where Tiberius had been secretive and restrained, Caligula would be theatrical and impulsive. Yet in their own ways, both rulers illustrated the challenges of the imperial system, its dependence on the character and will of a single man, and the inevitable distortions that came when that man's judgment was clouded by isolation, suspicion, or personal demons. For all his faults, Tiberius preserved the empire during his 2-decade reign, passing it on in a strong material condition, if not in a healthy political climate. His legacy, like his life, defies simple judgment, remaining one of the more enigmatic and contested in the long roll of Roman emperors.